The thunderous roar of four Allison T-56 turboprop engines cut through the pre-dawn silence at Dover Air Force Base as Captain Rebecca "Raven" Thompson completed her final walk-around inspection. The massive C-130 OJ Super Hercules towered above her in the dim glow of the flight line lights, its gray fuselage bearing the scars of countless missions across hostile skies. She ran her gloved hand along the aircraft's skin, checking for any signs of stress or damage with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through 7 years of cargo operations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 29, Rebecca had logged more flight hours in the Hercules than pilots twice her age. Her personnel file read like a textbook example of excellence. Top 5% of her flight training class, commendations for exceptional airmanship, and a spotless safety record across 3 combat deployments. Yet as she climbed the crew ladder into the cockpit, she could still hear the whispered conversations that followed her through the squadron-ready rooms and mess halls. Thompson's solid, but she's just a cargo pilot. Not like she's flying fighters or bombers. Trash hauling doesn't require the same skills. The comments stung because they came from fellow aviators who should have understood that flying a 175,000-pound aircraft loaded with critical supplies into contested airspace required every bit as much skill, courage, and split-second decision-making as any other mission. Perhaps more, considering cargo flights rarely receive the escort protection or priority support given to other aircraft. Rebecca settled into the left seat of the cockpit and began her pre-flight checklist, each switch and gauge position memorized. Through thousands of hours of repetition, the instrument panel came alive with digital displays and warning lights as she methodically worked through the startup sequence. Outside, her loadmaster Technical Sergeant Maria Rodriguez supervised the final loading of their cargo, medical equipment, ammunition, food supplies, and replacement parts destined for forward operating Base Phoenix in eastern Syria. "Morning, Raven," came a voice from the cockpit doorway. Rebecca looked up to see her co-pilot, First Lieutenant David Chun, climbing into the right seat with 2 steaming cups of coffee. Chun was fresh from advanced pilot training, barely 6 months out of flight school, but he possessed the quiet confidence and attention to detail that made him an excellent co-pilot. "Morning, Dave. How's our cargo load looking?" 78,000 pounds total. Rodriguez has everything secured and accounted for. She's been doing this for 12 years, so I'm not worried about anything shifting around back there. Rebecca accepted the coffee gratefully and took a sip of the bitter liquid. "Weather?" Chun pulled out his kneeboard and flipped through the meteorological briefings. Clear skies for the first 8 hours of flight. Some scattered clouds building over the Mediterranean, but nothing that should affect our approach to Phoenix. Winds at the destination are light and variable. The mission was routine by every measure, a standard cargo resupply, run to one of dozens of forward operating bases scattered across the Middle East. Rebecca had flown this exact route 47 times in the past 2 years, threading her way through international airspace boundaries, avoiding known surface-to-air missile sites, and delivering the supplies that kept American forces operating in hostile territory. It was the kind of mission that rarely made headlines or earned decorations, but it was the backbone of military operations worldwide. As Rebecca continued her pre-flight preparations, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in rural Montana, she had dreamed of becoming a pilot from the moment she first saw a C-130 practicing low-level flights over her family's ranch. Her father, a Vietnam veteran who had served as a helicopter door gunner, initially discouraged her aviation ambitions. "Flying's dangerous enough for men," he had said. "Women don't belong in cockpits." But Rebecca's mother, a former nurse who had served in military hospitals, encouraged her daughter's dreams. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do, she had advised. Prove them wrong with your actions, not your words. The advice had served Rebecca well through the challenges of military aviation training. She had excelled in every phase of instruction, earning the respect of her instructors through skill and determination rather than seeking special consideration. When she graduated from pilot training and received her wings, she had hoped for assignment to fighters or strategic bombers. Instead, she was assigned to Air Mobility Command and Cargo Operations. The assignment had initially felt like a disappointment, a sign that the Air Force didn't consider her capable of real flying. But over the years, Rebecca had come to appreciate the unique challenges and responsibilities of cargo operations. Fighter pilots might engage enemy aircraft in aerial combat, but cargo pilots kept entire military campaigns supplied and operational. Without the steady flow of ammunition, fuel, food, and equipment delivered by aircraft like her C-130 forward bases would quickly become untenable. Tower, Ghost Rider 47 requesting taxi clearance. Rebecca called into her radio as she completed the startup checklist. The Ghost Rider 47, taxi to runway 28 left. Winds 270 at 8 knots, visibility unlimited. Rebecca advanced the throttle slightly, feeling the big aircraft respond as it began rolling toward the active runway. The C-130 was not a graceful machine in the traditional sense, but it possessed a rugged reliability that had made it the workhorse of military aviation for over 6 decades. It could land on dirt strips barely longer than a football field, operate in conditions that would ground more sophisticated aircraft, and absorb battle damage that would destroy lesser machines. As they taxied past the squadron operations building, Rebecca could see other crews preparing for their own missions. Fighter pilots in their Nomex flight suits strode purposefully toward F-16s and F-22s, their aircraft gleaming with fresh paint and advanced avionics. Transport crews readied massive C-17 Globemasters for strategic airlift missions. Each aircraft type had its own culture and mystique within the Air Force hierarchy. Cargo pilots, especially those flying the older C-130 platform, occupied a different place in that hierarchy. They were respected for their technical proficiency and mission accomplishment, but they were also seen as less glamorous than their fighter and bomber counterparts. The distinction was subtle but persistent, reflected in everything from promotion opportunities to choice of assignments. Ghost Rider 47, cleared for takeoff, came the voice from the control tower. Rebecca lined up the aircraft on the runway, centerline, and advanced the throttles to takeoff power. The 4 engines responded with a deep rumble that she felt through the airframe, and the C-130 began its takeoff roll. Despite weighing over 150,000 pounds fully loaded, the aircraft accelerated steadily down the runway until Rebecca pulled back on the yoke at the calculated rotation speed. The ground fell away beneath them as they climbed into the clear morning sky over Delaware. Rebecca retracted the landing gear and set climb power, beginning the long journey that would take them across the Atlantic Ocean, through European airspace, and finally into the contested skies over Syria. "Gear up, flaps up," she called out as Chun configured the aircraft for cruise flight. Below them, the American coastline spread out like a patchwork quilt of fields, forests, and cities. Rebecca had flown this departure route hundreds of times, but she still felt a surge of pride at seeing her country from above. Somewhere down there, families were beginning their daily routines, unaware of the military operations that helped ensure their safety and freedom. The flight across the Atlantic passed uneventfully, the autopilot maintaining course and altitude, while Rebecca and Chun monitored systems and weather. Rodriguez moved periodically through the cargo compartment, checking tie-down straps and ensuring that the precious cargo remained secure. The medical equipment they carried would save lives at Phobe Phoenix. The ammunition would help defend the base against attacks, and the replacement parts would keep critical systems operational. As they approached European airspace, Rebecca began coordinating with air traffic control centers for their routing through the complex web of international boundaries. Military cargo flights operated under different rules than civilian aircraft, but they still had to navigate the same crowded airspace while maintaining the security requirements of their classified missions. Raven, we're getting some chatter. On the emergency frequencies, Chun reported as they crossed into German airspace. Sounds like there might be some kind of situation developing in our area of operations. Rebecca frowned and switched to the appropriate radio frequency. Military communications were often encrypted, but emergency transmission sometimes went out in the clear to ensure maximum coverage. What she heard made her stomach tighten with concern. Fragmentary reports were coming in about a major attack on FOB Phoenix, with casualties mounting and critical supplies running dangerously low. The base's medical facility was overwhelmed with wounded soldiers, and their ammunition reserves were nearly exhausted after repelling multiple assault waves. "Dave, pull up the latest intelligence briefing on Phoenix," Rebecca ordered as she began calculating fuel consumption and flight times. Chun accessed the mission planning system on his tablet computer, scrolling through the most recent operational updates. "Not good, Raven. Intelligence reports show increased enemy activity in the area over the past week. Phoenix has been taking periodic rocket and mortar fire, and there are indications of a major offensive being planned." Rebecca studied the tactical situation as they continued eastward over Europe. FOB Phoenix was a small but strategically important outpost, located at a critical crossroads that controlled movement between several major Syrian cities. The base typically maintained a garrison of about 200 soldiers, but recent operations had reduced that number to fewer than 150 effective personnel. Their cargo loads suddenly seemed even more critical than usual. The medical supplies they carried could mean the difference between life and death for wounded soldiers, while the ammunition might determine whether the base could hold against another major attack. But as Rebecca monitored the radio traffic, it became clear that their mission was about to become far more complicated than a routine supply run. "Ghost Rider 47, this is Command and Control," came a transmission on their primary mission frequency. "Be advised your destination is currently under attack. Stand by for possible mission modification." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rebecca acknowledged the transmission while her mind raced through the implications. Mission modifications during flight were rarely good news, especially when the destination was under active attack. At best, they might be diverted to an alternate airfield and delayed until the situation stabilized. At worst, the mission might be canceled entirely, leaving the soldiers at FOB Phoenix without the critical supplies they desperately needed. But cancellation wasn't an option Rebecca was willing to accept easily. She had spent 7 years building a reputation for mission accomplishment, for finding ways to deliver critical cargo even when conditions were less than ideal. The soldiers at FOB Phoenix were counting on her, just as soldiers at dozens of other forward bases had counted on her over the years. As they continued their eastward flight, Rebecca began mentally reviewing alternative approaches and contingency plans. The standard approach to FOB Phoenix involved a straight-in landing on the base's single runway, but if the airfield was under attack, that option might not be available. There were other airstrips in the region, but none as close to the beleaguered base. "Rodriguez, how's our cargo secured back there?" Rebecca called over the intercom. "Everything's locked down tight, Captain," came the immediate reply. "But I'm hearing some interesting radio chatter." "Are we still going to Phoenix?" "That's the plan until someone tells me otherwise," Rebecca replied. "Make sure that medical equipment is easily accessible. We might need to offload it quickly." The truth was that Rebecca had never been content with the limitations that others tried to place on her or her mission. Whether it was instructors who doubted her abilities during flight training, fellow pilots who dismissed cargo operations as less demanding, or commanders who seemed to view her as just another pilot rather than recognizing her exceptional capabilities. She had consistently exceeded expectations through skill, determination, and an unwillingness to accept failure. Now, as her aircraft carried life-saving supplies towards soldiers under attack, Rebecca felt the familiar surge of determination that had driven her throughout her career. She might be just a cargo pilot in the eyes of some, but she knew that cargo pilots often faced challenges and made decisions that were every bit as demanding as those faced by pilots in more glamorous assignments. The radio crackled, again with another transmission from Command and Control. Ghost Rider 47. Be advised, Phoenix is requesting immediate resupply of medical supplies. They have multiple urgent casualties and are critically low on blood products and surgical equipment. Rebecca felt her jaw tighten with resolve. Wounded soldiers were dying while she flew toward them with exactly the supplies they needed to save lives. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was determined to find a way to complete her mission and deliver those life-saving supplies to the people who needed them most. As the C-130 continued its eastward flight through European airspace, Rebecca began preparing for what she sensed would be the most challenging mission of her career. She had no way of knowing that within hours her skills, courage, and determination would be tested in ways that would transform her from an undervalued cargo pilot into a legend whose actions would inspire generations of aviators to come. 8 hours into the flight, as they crossed into Turkish airspace over the darkening Mediterranean, the first signs of serious trouble began filtering through the radio static. Rebecca had been monitoring multiple frequencies, while Chun handled the routine communications with air traffic control. But now the emergency channels were lighting up with increasing urgency. Multiple casualties at Phoenix, crackled a transmission from an unknown call sign. Request immediate medical evacuation. We have critical injuries requiring surgical intervention. Rebecca exchanged glances with Chun as they processed the implications. Medical evacuations from forward operating bases typically meant helicopter flights to larger military hospitals, but if Phoenix was requesting immediate assistance, their situation had deteriorated beyond routine casualties. Command and Control. Ghost Rider 47 requesting updated status on Destination Phoenix. Rebecca transmitted on their primary mission frequency. The response came back immediately, the voice tense with barely controlled urgency. Ghost Rider 47, Phoenix has been under sustained attack for the past 6 hours. Enemy forces have overrun the outer perimeter and are advancing on the main compound. Casualties are mounting, and they're running critically low on medical supplies and ammunition. Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. This was no longer a routine supply mission to a forward base experiencing minor harassment fire. Phoenix was fighting for its survival, and their cargo load had suddenly become the difference between life and death for the soldiers defending the base. "What's our estimated time to destination?" she asked Chun. 2 hours and 47 minutes. "At current speed," he replied, checking the navigation display. "But Raven, if they're under that kind of attack, the runway might not be usable." Before Rebecca could respond, Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom from the cargo compartment. "Captain, I've been monitoring the tactical frequencies. Phoenix is reporting they've taken direct hits on their medical facility. Their doctor was wounded in the last attack, and they're down to 1 medic for the entire base." The situation was deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. Intelligence briefings had indicated increased enemy activity in the region, but nothing approaching the scale of assault that Phoenix was now facing. Rebecca began running through contingency plans in her mind, but each option seemed to present insurmountable challenges. Ghost Rider 47, be advised, Phoenix runway has sustained damage from rocket attacks. Came another transmission from Command and Control. Runway is partially obstructed, but may still be usable for emergency landings. A damaged runway added another layer of complexity to what was already becoming an impossible mission. The C-130 was designed to operate from rough airstrips, but landing on a damaged runway under combat conditions pushed the aircraft's capabilities to their absolute limits. "Dave, pull up the technical specifications for Phoenix's runway," Rebecca ordered as she began calculating landing distances and performance requirements. Chun accessed the airfield information on his tablet. "Standard runway length is 5,000 feet, but if there's debris or crater damage, we might be looking at significantly less usable distance." Rebecca nodded grimly. A fully loaded C-130 typically required at least 4,000 feet for a safe landing under normal conditions. With battle damage to the runway and the stress of combat operations, those margins disappeared quickly. The radio suddenly erupted with multiple simultaneous transmissions as the situation at Phoenix reached a critical point. Emergency calls for fire support mixed with casualty reports and ammunition requests, creating a chaotic picture of a base fighting desperately to survive an overwhelming assault. All stations, this is Phoenix Actual," came a new voice, commanding and urgent. "We are being overrun on the eastern perimeter. Immediate reinforcement required, or we will be forced to abandon the main compound." Rebecca's hands tightened on the controls as she absorbed the implications. Phoenix Actual was the base commander's call sign, and if he was broadcasting in the clear on emergency frequencies, the situation had moved beyond desperate to catastrophic. "Command and Control, Ghost Rider 47, Rebecca transmitted. Request permission to proceed to Phoenix despite hostile activity. Our cargo load contains critical medical supplies that could save lives." There was a long pause before the response came back, and Rebecca could hear the hesitation in the controller's voice. "Ghost Rider 47, negative. Divert to alternate airfield Bravo. Phoenix is too dangerous for cargo operations." The order hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Alternate airfield Bravo was a Turkish military base nearly 200 miles from Phoenix, far enough away that ground transportation of critical supplies would take hours that the wounded soldiers didn't have. Following orders would mean abandoning the men and women fighting for their lives at Phoenix. "Command and Control, Ghost Rider 47 requests clarification. Are you ordering us to divert from Phoenix?" "Ghost Rider 47, that is affirmative. Divert to Bravo immediately and await further instructions." Rebecca stared at the radio. For a long moment, her mind racing through the implications of the order. Military discipline demanded immediate compliance with lawful orders from superior authority, but every instinct she possessed as a pilot and as a human being rebelled against abandoning soldiers who desperately needed the supplies she carried. "Raven, what are we going to do?" Chun asked quietly. Before Rebecca could answer, Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom again, tight with emotion. "Captain, I'm hearing reports that Phoenix has wounded soldiers dying because they don't have the blood products and surgical equipment we're carrying. The base medic is performing surgery with a field trauma kit." The image of a medic trying to save lives with inadequate equipment while Rebecca flew life-saving supplies to a distant airfield crystallized her decision. She had not joined the Air Force to follow orders that resulted in preventable deaths. She had joined to serve her country and protect the people who served alongside her. "Ghost Rider 47, Command and Control, confirm your diversion to alternate Bravo," came the repeated order. Rebecca keyed her microphone with steady hands. "Command and Control, Ghost Rider 47 has mechanical issues requiring immediate landing at the nearest suitable airfield, proceeding to Phoenix for emergency landing." It was a lie, but it was a lie that would allow her to save lives. The radio erupted with immediate responses as Command and Control attempted to clarify her transmission, but Rebecca switched to a different frequency, temporarily cutting off the official channels that would order her to abandon her mission. "Raven, did you just tell Command we have mechanical problems?" Chun asked, his voice reflecting both admiration and concern. I told them what they needed to hear to let us do our job, Rebecca replied firmly. Phoenix needs those medical supplies, and we're the only aircraft in position to deliver them. Sometimes you have to choose between following orders and doing what's right. Chun nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the decision they had just made. Disobeying direct orders was a court-martial offense that could end their careers and result in criminal prosecution. But allowing soldiers to die when they had the power to save them was a betrayal of everything they had sworn to uphold as military officers. Rodriguez, how quickly can we offload the medical supplies once we're on the ground? Rebecca called over the intercom. If we have ground personnel to help, maybe 10 minutes for the critical items. But Captain, if Phoenix is under active attack, we might not have 10 minutes. Rebecca was already working through the tactical problems in her mind. A standard approach to Phoenix would bring them in from the east, directly over the enemy forces that were attacking the base. They would be flying slowly and predictably, making them an easy target for any surface-to-air weapons the attackers might possess. Dave, what's our fuel situation? She asked as she began planning an alternative approach. Enough for the landing at Phoenix plus about 2 hours reserve, Chun replied. But if we have to wave off and try multiple approaches, that margin disappears quickly. The challenges were mounting faster than solutions could be found. A damaged runway, active combat operations, enemy forces in the immediate area, limited fuel, and the certainty that their unauthorized mission would result in severe disciplinary action if they survived. But as Rebecca monitored the increasingly desperate radio transmissions from Phoenix, she knew that survival was a secondary concern. Soldiers were dying while she carried the supplies that could save their lives. The technical challenges and personal consequences paled in comparison to that fundamental responsibility. Phoenix Base, this is Ghost Rider 47, Rebecca. Transmitted on the base's tactical frequency. We are inbound with critical medical supplies. Request current runway status and enemy situation. The response came back immediately, relief evident in the voice despite the combat stress. Ghost Rider 47, Phoenix Base, thank God you're coming. Runway has 2 large craters but is still marginally usable. Enemy forces are approximately 500 meters east of the runway approach. You'll be taking fire during your final approach. Rebecca absorbed the information with the calm professionalism that had characterized her entire career. Taking fire during final approach meant flying slowly and predictably through a gauntlet of enemy weapons, with no ability to maneuver defensively without aborting the landing. Phoenix Base, understood. What's your casualty status? Ghost Rider, we have 14 wounded requiring immediate surgical intervention. Our medical facility took a direct hit, and we're operating out of a bunker with minimal equipment. Your medical supplies are literally life or death for these soldiers. The weight of responsibility settled on Rebecca's shoulders like a physical burden. 14 wounded soldiers depending on her ability to land a massive cargo aircraft on a damaged runway under enemy fire. It was beyond anything covered in flight training or operational manuals. Chun, start running the numbers for a short field landing on a 4,000-foot runway with obstacles, she ordered as she began her descent toward Phoenix. Already on it, Chun replied, his fingers flying over the performance charts. We'll be right at the edge of the aircraft's capabilities, especially if we hit those craters wrong. Through the cockpit windows, Rebecca could see the first traces of smoke on the horizon, marking the location of Phobe Phoenix. As they drew closer, the smoke columns became more defined, rising from multiple points around the small base. Explosions flickered in the gathering dusk like deadly lightning. Rodriguez, secure everything in the cargo compartment for combat landing, Rebecca announced over the intercom. This is going to be rough. Already done, Captain. Medical supplies are positioned for quick offload. I've also prepared the combat packs in case we need to defend the aircraft on the ground. The possibility of having to defend their aircraft hadn't occurred to Rebecca, but Rodriguez's foresight highlighted another dimension of the mission they were undertaking. If enemy forces overran the runway while they were on the ground, her crew might find themselves fighting as infantry rather than flying as aircrew. Phoenix Base, Ghost Rider 47 beginning final approach. Rebecca transmitted as she lined up the aircraft with the damaged runway. Request all available suppressive fire on the eastern approach route. Ghost Rider, roger. All defensive positions engage targets east of the runway. You'll have covering fire, but expect incoming rounds during your approach. Rebecca took a deep breath and began the most dangerous approach of her career, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether 14 wounded soldiers lived or died, and whether her decision to disobey orders would be vindicated or condemned by the outcome. The first tracer rounds streaked past the cockpit windows, like deadly fireworks as Rebecca descended through 3,000 feet, the burning outline of FOB Phoenix growing larger through the gathering darkness. The base looked like a small island of defiant light, surrounded by an ocean of hostile territory, with muzzle flashes winking from positions that seemed impossibly close to the runway. Jesus Christ, Chun muttered, watching the light show of combat unfolding below them. They're right on top of the airfield. Rebecca's hands remained steady on the controls, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. 7 years of cargo operations had taught her to compartmentalize fear and focus on the immediate task at hand. Right now, that task was threatening. A 175,000-pound aircraft through a maze of enemy fire to reach wounded soldiers who desperately needed the medical supplies in her cargo hold. Phoenix Base, Ghost Rider 47. I count multiple hostile positions within small arms range of the runway, she transmitted. Can you suppress those positions during our approach? The response crackled back immediately, the base commander's voice tight with stress. Ghost Rider, we're doing everything we can, but we're critically low on ammunition. Most of our defensive fire is concentrated on the eastern perimeter, where they're trying to breach our main defenses. Rebecca absorbed this information while calculating approach angles and emergency escape routes. The base's defensive positions were fully committed to preventing a ground assault, which meant her aircraft would have minimal protection during the most vulnerable phase of flight. The final approach and landing. Raven, we've got another problem, Chun reported, pointing to his tactical display. I'm picking up surface-to-air missile signatures. Looks like man-portable systems, probably Russian SS-7 South or similar. Surface-to-air missiles transformed the tactical equation completely. Small arms fire was dangerous, but survivable if they maintained speed and altitude until the last possible moment. Missiles could reach out and destroy them long before they got close to the runway. How many signatures? Rebecca asked, beginning evasive maneuvers that would complicate their approach, but might confuse any missile operators on the ground. At least 3 distinct signatures, maybe more. They're moving around, so it's hard to get a precise count. Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom, calm despite the circumstances. Captain, I can see the runway now. Looks like 2 major craters, one about halfway down on the left side, another near the far end. There's also debris scattered across the surface. Rebecca switched her attention between the tactical situation outside and the landing calculations. Racing through her mind, the craters would force her to land long and stop short, using only the undamaged portions of runway while avoiding the debris field. It was a precision flying challenge that would test every skill she had developed over thousands of flight hours. Phoenix Base, Ghost Rider 47 requests immediate status on your wounded, she transmitted as they descended through 2,000 feet. Ghost Rider, we have 3 soldiers who won't survive the next hour without immediate surgical intervention. The blood loss is too severe for our field medic to handle with current supplies. We need those plasma units and surgical equipment you're carrying. The stark reality hit Rebecca like a physical blow. 3 soldiers would die within the hour if she failed to land successfully. Not sometime in the future, not as a statistical possibility, but within the next 60 minutes. The mathematical precision of the deadline stripped away any remaining doubt about the necessity of continuing the approach. "Dave, I need you to handle all radio communications from here on," she ordered, her full attention now focused on the approaching runway. "Monitor our glide path and call out any deviations. Rodriguez, I want you strapped in and ready for immediate cargo offload the second we stop rolling." "Copy that, Captain." Both crew members responded simultaneously. The aircraft was now descending. Through 1,500 feet, low enough that individual muzzle flashes from enemy weapons were clearly visible. Rebecca could see soldiers moving between defensive positions around the base perimeter, their movements highlighted by tracer fire and explosions. The sight reminded her that her 3-person crew was about to land in the middle of an active battlefield where dozens of armed combatants were trying to kill each other. "Missile launch!" Chun shouted, pointing to a bright flash from the tree line east of the runway. Rebecca immediately threw the C-130 into a violent evasive maneuver, pulling the aircraft into a steep climbing turn that stressed the airframe to its limits. The surface-to-air missile streaked past their previous position, its rocket motor burning like a miniature sun before exploding harmlessly in the distance. "That was too close," Chin breathed, his face pale in the glow of the instrument lights. Rebecca leveled the aircraft and began setting up for another approach, but the missile attack had forced them off course and consumed precious fuel. They were now approaching from a different angle, one that would bring them directly over known enemy positions during the most vulnerable phase of their landing. "Phoenix Base, we're setting up for an approach from the northwest," she transmitted. "Be advised we'll be flying directly over hostile positions. Request maximum suppressive fire during our final approach. Ghost Rider, understand the northwest approach. We'll do what we can, but ammunition is critically low. You're going to take fire." As Rebecca lined up for the final approach, a new voice crackled over the radio. Command and Control had managed to locate them despite her frequency changes. "Ghost Rider 47, this is Colonel Patterson, Wing Commander. You are ordered to immediately abort your approach and proceed to alternate airfield Bravo. This is a direct order." Rebecca stared at the radio for a moment, understanding that her career was about to end regardless of the outcome of this mission. Colonel Patterson was not just her wing commander. He was a man she had served under for 3 years and genuinely respected. Disobeying his direct order was an act of insubordination that would result in court-martial and dismissal from the Air Force, but 3 soldiers would die within the hour if she followed that order. "Ghost Rider 47, acknowledge immediately." Patterson's voice came again, more insistent. Rebecca looked at Chun, who was watching her with a mixture of admiration and concern. She could see in his eyes that he understood the magnitude of the decision she was facing. Following orders would preserve their careers and keep them safe, but it would condemn wounded soldiers to death. "Colonel Patterson, Ghost Rider 47. She finally transmitted. "I have wounded soldiers on the ground who will die without the medical supplies I'm carrying. I cannot in good conscience abandon them to follow an order that will result in preventable deaths." The radio was silent for a long moment before Patterson's voice returned, heavy with resignation. "Captain Thompson, you understand that you are disobeying a direct order in combat conditions. The consequences will be severe." "Yes, sir, I understand." Ghost Rider 47, continuing approach to Phoenix. Rebecca switched off the command frequency and focused entirely on the landing ahead. She had just ended her military career, but she had also chosen to save lives over preserving her own future. The weight of that decision settled on her shoulders as she began the final approach to Phobe Phoenix. 1,000 feet, Chun called out, monitoring their altitude. Airspeed 140 knots on glide path. The runway was now clearly visible. Ahead, marked by debris and illuminated by the muzzle flashes from defensive positions around the base perimeter. Rebecca could see the two large craters Rodriguez had described, along with scattered metal fragments that would pose additional hazards during the landing roll. 800 feet, airspeed steady. Phoenix Base is engaging hostile positions. On our approach route, bright tracers from the base's defensive weapons streaked out toward enemy positions, temporarily suppressing some of the incoming fire. But Rebecca could still see individual weapon flashes from multiple locations along their approach path. 600 feet, taking fire from multiple positions. Bullets began striking the aircraft with metallic pings and thuds that were audible over the engine noise. Rebecca forced herself to ignore the impacts and maintain precise control of the aircraft's flight path. Any deviation now could result in missing the narrow strip of undamaged runway between the craters. 400 feet. Major damage to number 3 engine. Temperature rising rapidly. Rebecca's eyes flicked to the engine instruments, confirming Chun's report. The number 3 engine had taken multiple hits and was beginning to fail, but they were too close to the runway to abort now. She would have to land with asymmetric thrust and hope the remaining engines provided enough power for a go-around if the approach went wrong. 200 feet. Number 3 engine failure. Feathering. Prop. Chun ran through the engine failure checklist with mechanical precision, while Rebecca compensated for the loss of power and asymmetric thrust. The aircraft wanted to yaw toward the dead engine, requiring constant pressure on the rudder pedals to maintain directional control. 100 feet on a glide path, runway in sight. Rebecca could now see individual soldiers moving around the base, some firing weapons, while others prepared to help offload her cargo. The responsibility of landing safely felt enormous, not just for her crew, but for every person on the ground who was depending on the medical supplies in her cargo hold. 50 feet, flare for landing. Rebecca pulled back on the yoke, raising the aircraft's nose to arrest its descent and prepare for touchdown. The runway rushed up toward them, its damaged surface looking even more treacherous from this perspective. Contact. The main landing gear struck the runway with a bone-jarring impact that shook the entire aircraft. Rebecca immediately deployed the thrust reversers on the 3 remaining engines and stood on the brake pedals, trying to stop the massive aircraft before it reached the craters that marked the unusable portions of runway. The C-130 decelerated rapidly, its tires smoking as they grabbed the rough concrete surface. Rebecca fought to keep the aircraft centered between the craters, while enemy fire continued to rake the runway around them. "We're down," Chun called out as they rolled to a stop just short of the far crater, but their relief was short-lived. Through the cockpit windows, Rebecca could see enemy fighters advancing toward the runway from multiple directions, their weapons firing as they closed the distance to her stationary aircraft. The mission was far from over. The moment the C-130's engines wound down, Rebecca could hear the sharp crack of rifle fire striking the aircraft's fuselage. Through the cockpit windows, she watched tracer rounds streak across the darkened runway as enemy fighters advanced from 3 different directions, their muzzle flashes creating a deadly constellation in the night. "We've got company," Chun announced, grimly, pointing toward a group of armed figures emerging from the tree line, barely 200 meters from their position. Rebecca's mind shifted instantly from pilot to combat leader. The medical supplies in their cargo hold were useless if they couldn't get them off the aircraft and into the hands of the base medic. But first, they had to survive the next few minutes. "Rodriguez, what's our defensive posture?" she called over the intercom while scanning the tactical situation outside. "I've got the crew-served weapon mounted and ready," Rodriguez replied from the cargo compartment. "But Captain, we're sitting ducks out here. This aircraft wasn't designed for ground combat." Before Rebecca could respond, the radio crackled with an urgent transmission from Phoenix Base. "Ghost Rider 47, This is Phoenix Actual. We're sending a squad to secure your aircraft, but they're pinned down by enemy fire. You're on your own for at least 10 minutes. 10 minutes might as well have been 10 hours given their current situation. Rebecca could see at least 30 enemy fighters converging on their position, with more emerging from concealed positions around the airfield perimeter. Her 3-person crew was about to face overwhelming odds while trying to offload critical medical supplies. "Dave, can you handle a rifle?" she asked Chun as she unbuckled her harness and grabbed her personal weapon from its storage rack. "I qualified expert marksman in basic training," Chun replied, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "But that was 4 years ago. Good enough. Rodriguez, start off loading the medical supplies. Dave and I will provide security." Rebecca moved through the aircraft with practiced efficiency, her pilot training having included extensive combat survival instruction. She had never expected to use those skills while defending a cargo aircraft on an active runway, but military training emphasized adaptability above all else. The first priority was establishing fields of fire that would allow them to engage approaching enemies while protecting the cargo offload operation. The C-130's design included several defensive positions, but they had never been intended for sustained ground combat against superior numbers. "Contact front," Rodriguez shouted from the cargo ramp as enemy fighters approached within effective rifle range. Rebecca opened fire through a cockpit window, her shots carefully aimed at the lead elements of the advancing force. Years of military marksmanship training served her well as she engaged targets at ranges that would have been challenging for infantry soldiers. Chun took position at another window and began engaging enemies approaching from the aircraft's right side. His shooting was methodical and effective, each shot carefully placed to maximize impact while conserving ammunition. "Raven, we've got a problem," Rodriguez called out between bursts of machine gun fire. "These guys know what they're doing. They're using fire and movement tactics to advance on our position." Rebecca observed the enemy assault with growing concern. These weren't untrained insurgents conducting a hasty attack. They were disciplined fighters executing a coordinated assault on her aircraft. Someone had planned this operation specifically to prevent the medical supplies from reaching the wounded soldiers at Phoenix Base. "How long does it take to offload the critical medical items?" she asked Rodriguez while changing magazines in her rifle. "At least 15 minutes if we're not being shot at. Maybe 30 minutes under these conditions." 30 minutes was impossible. Rebecca could see that the enemy forces were already close enough to assault the aircraft directly, and her small crew couldn't hold them off for more than a few minutes against such overwhelming numbers. But as she watched the tactical situation develop, Rebecca noticed something that might provide an opportunity. The enemy fighters were concentrating their assault on the aircraft itself, apparently unaware that Phoenix Base's defensive positions could provide supporting fire if properly coordinated. "Phoenix Base, Ghost Rider 47, she transmitted, while continuing to engage targets. "Can you provide supporting fire on enemy positions attacking our aircraft?" "Ghost Rider, negative. Our defensive positions are oriented toward the base perimeter. We can't shift fire without exposing our main defenses to assault." Rebecca studied the base layout through her rifle scope, identifying the defensive positions and calculating angles of fire. Phoenix Base's defenses were indeed oriented toward protecting the main compound, but there might be a way to coordinate their efforts. "Phoenix Base, if we can create a diversion that draws enemy forces away from your perimeter, can you shift some defensive fire to support our position?" There was a pause before the response came. "Ghost Rider, that's a negative. We can't risk our main defenses for one aircraft." The refusal was militarily sound, but personally devastating. Rebecca and her crew were being written off as acceptable losses, sacrificed to preserve the base's main defensive capabilities. It was a rational decision from a strategic perspective, but it condemned her crew to almost certain death. "Captain, they're massing for a final assault," Chun reported, pointing toward a large group of enemy fighters gathering in the tree line. "Looks like at least 50 personnel preparing to rush our position." Rebecca made a rapid calculation of their remaining ammunition and the time required to offload the medical supplies. The mathematics were brutally clear. They couldn't hold off a sustained assault by 50 enemy fighters, while simultaneously conducting cargo operations. But surrender wasn't an option. The wounded soldiers at Phoenix Base would die without the medical supplies in her cargo hold, and her crew would likely be killed or captured regardless of their tactical situation. "Rodriguez, priority offload on the blood plasma and surgical. Equipment only," she ordered. "Forget everything else. We need to get those critical items to the base medic." "Copy that, Captain, but I'll need security while I work. Those cases are heavy and awkward to move under fire." Rebecca looked at Chun, seeing her own determination reflected in his face. They had come too far and risked too much to fail now. The medical supplies would reach the wounded soldiers, regardless of the cost. "Dave, we're going to conduct a fighting withdrawal toward the base perimeter," she announced. "We'll carry the medical supplies manually while providing our own security." It was an almost impossible plan. 3 aircrew members carrying heavy medical equipment across several hundred meters of open ground while under fire from superior enemy forces. But it was the only option that offered any chance of completing their mission. "Outstanding," Chun replied grimly. "Let's do it." As they prepared for the most dangerous phase of their mission, Rebecca reflected on the chain of decisions that had brought them to this point. 8 hours ago, she had been a cargo pilot conducting a routine supply mission. Now she was leading her crew in a desperate ground combat operation to save wounded soldiers. The transformation had happened gradually, each decision building on the previous one until she found herself in a situation that no training manual had ever addressed. But every choice had been driven by the same fundamental principle. The mission came first, and the mission was saving lives. "Enemy assault begins," Rodriguez called out as the massed enemy force began advancing across the open ground toward their aircraft. Rebecca grabbed the first case of medical supplies and slung her rifle across her shoulder. "Move now. Head for the base perimeter." The 3 aircrew members burst from the aircraft carrying critical medical equipment, immediately drawing intense fire from the advancing enemy force. Rebecca led the way, using her knowledge of small unit tactics to bound from cover to cover, while Chun and Rodriguez followed with the precious cargo. Bullets cracked through the air around them as they sprinted across the open runway, each step bringing them closer to the relative safety of Phoenix Base's defensive perimeter. But the enemy forces were closing rapidly, and Rebecca knew they wouldn't reach the base before being overtaken. "Contact left," Chun shouted, engaging enemy fighters who had flanked their movement route. Rebecca spun toward the threat while still carrying her medical case, firing accurately despite the awkward shooting position. Her shots found their targets, but more enemy fighters were emerging from concealed positions throughout the area. "Phoenix Base, Ghost Rider 47 is conducting fighting withdrawal to your perimeter with critical medical supplies," she transmitted between engagements. "Request permission to enter your defensive perimeter. Ghost Rider, you are cleared to enter through Checkpoint Alpha. We'll provide covering fire." Suddenly, the defensive positions around Phoenix Base erupted with suppressive fire directed at the enemy forces pursuing Rebecca's team. The psychological effect was immediate, as the advancing enemies sought cover rather than continuing their assault. "Move!" Rebecca shouted, using the suppressive fire to bound forward with her precious cargo. The 3 aircrew members sprinted the final 100 meters to Phoenix Base's perimeter, diving through the defensive wire just as enemy forces renewed their assault on the abandoned aircraft. Behind them, the C-130 was being overrun, but the critical medical supplies were safe. "This way," called a soldier from Phoenix Base. leading them toward the medical bunker where wounded soldiers awaited treatment. Rebecca followed the soldier through a maze of defensive positions and supply bunkers, still carrying the case of blood plasma that would save lives within the next few minutes. The base was smaller than she had expected, with barely enough space for the essential facilities needed to support combat operations. "Doc Martinez is waiting for you in the medical bunker," the soldier explained as they approached a reinforced concrete structure. "He's got 3 soldiers who won't make it without immediate surgery." Rebecca entered the medical bunker to find a scene that would stay with her for the rest of her life. 3 wounded soldiers lay on makeshift operating tables while a single medic worked frantically with inadequate equipment. The medic looked up as they entered, relief flooding his face when he saw the medical cases. "Thank God," Doc Martinez breathed. "I was about to lose all 3 of them." Rebecca set down her case and immediately began opening it to reveal the blood plasma, surgical instruments, and antibiotics that would save the wounded soldiers' lives. After everything they had endured to deliver these supplies, watching them being put to immediate use provided a satisfaction that transcended any personal accomplishment. "What do you need us to do?" she asked Martinez. "Can any of you assist with medical procedures? I need extra hands for these surgeries." Rodriguez stepped forward immediately. "I was a medic before I cross-trained to aircrew. I can assist." As Rodriguez moved to help with the first surgery, Rebecca realized that their mission was far from over. The base was still under attack, their aircraft had been captured or destroyed, and they were now stranded in a forward operating base that might not survive the night, but they had saved 3 lives. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. The medical bunker shook violently as another mortar round exploded just outside the reinforced walls, sending dust cascading from the concrete ceiling. Rebecca steadied herself against the operating table where Doc Martinez and Rodriguez worked frantically to save the first wounded soldier, their hands moving with practiced precision, despite the chaos erupting around the base. "How many more incoming wounded?" Rebecca asked Martinez as she helped organize the medical supplies they had delivered. "At least 6 more critical cases, maybe more," Martinez replied without looking up from his patient. "The enemy has been using mortar and RPGs for the past hour. Our defensive positions are taking a beating." Through the bunker's small observation window, Rebecca could see muzzle flashes lighting up the night as Phoenix base's defenders engaged enemy forces from multiple directions. The attack had intensified significantly since her arrival, suggesting that the enemy commanders recognized the strategic importance of overrunning the base before reinforcements could arrive. "Captain Thompson," called a voice from the bunker entrance. Rebecca turned to see Major William Hayes, the base commander, approaching with a grim expression. "I need to speak with you privately." Rebecca followed Hayes to a corner of the bunker, where they could talk without disturbing the medical procedures. Hayes was a compact, weathered man in his early 40s, with the kind of intense focus that marked experienced combat commanders. "Captain, I want to thank you for what you've done tonight," Hayes began. "Those medical supplies have already saved 3 lives, and they'll save more before this is over. But I need to be frank about our situation." Rebecca waited for him to continue, though his expression already suggested that the news wouldn't be encouraging. "We're being overrun," Hayes said bluntly. "Enemy forces now control the runway and most of the eastern perimeter. We've lost contact with 2 of our forward observation posts, and ammunition is running critically low. I estimate we have maybe 2 hours before they breach our main defenses." The implications hit Rebecca immediately. Phoenix Base was facing imminent collapse, which meant that her crew was trapped in a forward operating base that might not exist by dawn. More importantly, the wounded soldiers they had risked everything to save might still die if the base fell to enemy forces. "What about reinforcements?" she asked. "Nearest friendly forces are 8 hours out, minimum." Air support is committed to other operations. We're on our own until at least dawn, and I'm not sure we can hold that long." Rebecca studied the tactical map Hayes showed her, noting the enemy positions that now surrounded the base on 3 sides. The situation was deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated, transforming what should have been a routine medical evacuation into a desperate last stand. "Major, what do you need from my crew?" "We're not infantry, but we can handle weapons and follow orders." Hayes looked surprised. "Captain, you've already done more than enough. Your priority should be finding a way to get your crew out of here alive." The suggestion that she should abandon the base and its defenders struck Rebecca as fundamentally wrong. Her crew had risked everything to deliver medical supplies to wounded soldiers. She wasn't about to abandon those same soldiers to save herself. "With respect, sir, we're not going anywhere. These soldiers are alive because of the medical supplies we delivered. We're not leaving them to die." Hayes studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Captain. If you're staying, I can use every rifle we can get. But I need to warn you, the odds of anyone surviving the next few hours are not good." Before Rebecca could respond, the radio crackled with an urgent transmission from one of the base's observation posts. "Phoenix Actual, this is OP-2. Enemy forces are massing for what looks like a final assault. I count at least 200 personnel with heavy weapons moving toward the main gate. 200 enemy fighters against fewer than 100 defenders, many of whom were wounded or exhausted from hours of continuous combat." The mathematics were brutal, but Rebecca had learned that mathematics didn't always determine the outcome of battles. "Major, do you have a communication system that can reach outside the immediate area?" she asked. "We've got a long-range radio, but it's been damaged. We can receive transmissions, but can't send anything beyond about 5 miles. Rebecca's mind began working through possibilities that hadn't existed a few minutes earlier. As a cargo pilot, she had extensive experience with long-range communications and navigation systems. More importantly, she knew the locations and radio frequencies of every military unit operating in the region. "Sir, if I can repair that radio, I might be able to coordinate support from units that don't even know we're under attack." Hayes looked skeptical. "Captain, you're a pilot, not a communications technician." "I'm also a graduate of the Air Force's Advanced Electronics course," Rebecca replied. "I've been repairing aircraft communication systems for 7 years. Radio equipment uses the same basic principles." It was a long shot, but it was also the only option that offered any hope of survival for the base's defenders. Rebecca had already committed herself and her crew to the fight. Now she needed to find a way to even the odds. "Show me the radio," she said. Hayes led her to the base's communications bunker, where she found a sophisticated long-range radio system that had been damaged by shrapnel from a nearby mortar explosion. The damage looked extensive, but Rebecca had seen worse problems solved with improvised repairs under field conditions. "Chun Rodriguez, I need you over here," she called to her crew members. Chun appeared immediately, but Rodriguez was still assisting with surgery in the medical bunker. Rebecca could see that her loadmaster was in her element, using medical skills that complemented her military training in ways that were saving lives. "What do you need?" Chun asked, examining the damaged radio equipment. "This radio is our only hope of calling for support," Rebecca explained. "The transmitter circuits are damaged, but I think we can bypass the damaged sections and restore transmission capability." Chun nodded, immediately grasping the technical challenge. As a co-pilot, he had extensive training in aircraft electrical systems, knowledge that would be invaluable in repairing the ground-based radio equipment. Working by the light of tactical flashlights, Rebecca and Chun began the delicate process of diagnosing and repairing the damaged radio circuits. The work required absolute precision under combat conditions, with mortar rounds exploding nearby and small arms fire rattling the bunker walls. "There," Rebecca said, completing a bypass circuit around the damaged transmitter section. "Try the radio now." Chun keyed the microphone and transmitted a test signal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the radio crackled to life with responses from multiple stations across the region. "Outstanding," Hayes breathed. "Who can you reach?" Rebecca was already scrolling through frequency listings, identifying military units that might be able to provide immediate assistance. Her cargo pilot experience had given her detailed knowledge of every friendly force operating within 300 miles of Phoenix Base. "I can reach at least 4 different units," she reported, "including an Apache helicopter squadron that's operating about 40 miles northwest of here." "Apache gunships?" Hayes asked, his voice reflecting the first hope Rebecca had heard since arriving at the base. 2 H-64 Apaches conducting armed reconnaissance. They might be able to provide close air support if we can convince them to divert from their current mission. Rebecca began transmitting on the Apache squadron's tactical frequency, using her knowledge of military communications protocols to establish contact with the helicopter crews. Viper flight, this is Ghost Rider 47 declaring emergency at FOB Phoenix. Request immediate close air support for base under attack." The response came back immediately. "Ghost Rider 47, this is Viper lead. We copy. Your emergency transmission. What is your situation?" Rebecca quickly outlined the tactical situation while Hayes provided details about enemy positions and friendly locations. The Apache pilots listened intently, asking technical questions about target identification and rules of engagement. "Ghost Rider, Viper lead. We are 20 minutes from your location and carrying full combat loads. Request immediate marking of enemy positions." Rebecca felt a surge of hope for the first time since landing at Phoenix Base. Apache helicopters were purpose-built tank killers, equipped with missiles and cannons that could devastate enemy forces in the open terrain around the base. But as she coordinated with the incoming helicopters, another crisis was developing. Rodriguez burst into the communications bunker, her medical scrubs stained with blood. "Captain, we've got a major problem in the medical bunker," she reported urgently. 3 more wounded just came in, all critical. But that's not the worst part. Doc Martinez collapsed from exhaustion. "I'm the only medical personnel left, and I've got 6 critical patients who need immediate surgery." The situation had just become impossible. Rodriguez was skilled, but she wasn't a doctor, and performing complex surgery on 6 critical patients simultaneously was beyond any single person's capabilities. Without additional medical support, the soldiers they had risked everything to save would die anyway. "How long can you keep them stable?" Rebecca asked. "Maybe an hour if everything goes perfectly. But Captain, I need real medical assistance. I can't do this alone." Rebecca's mind raced through the available options. The nearest military hospital was hundreds of miles away, far beyond the range of any medical evacuation helicopter. But there might be another solution, one that would require her to make another impossible decision. "Rodriguez, what if we could get a real doctor here within the next hour? That would save all of them," Rodriguez replied. "But where are you going to find a doctor in the middle of a war zone?" Rebecca was already keying the radio, transmitting on a frequency she knew would reach the medical evacuation units operating throughout the region. Her plan was desperate and probably illegal, but it was the only option that offered any hope of saving the wounded soldiers. Dustoff 6-1. Dustoff 6-1. This is Ghost Rider 47 declaring a medical emergency at FOB Phoenix. The response came back immediately. "Ghost Rider 47. This is Dustoff 6-1. We copy your medical emergency. What is your situation?" "Dustoff. We have 6 critical casualties requiring immediate surgical intervention. Our medical officer is incapacitated, and we need a trauma surgeon on site within the next hour." There was a long pause before the response came. "Ghost Rider, negative. Phoenix is in a hot LZ under active attack. We cannot risk a medical evacuation helicopter in those conditions." Rebecca had expected that response, but she also knew that medical evacuation crews were driven by the same commitment to saving lives that had brought her to Phoenix Base. Dustoff 6-1. "Understand your concerns about the hot LZ, but we've got incoming Apache support that will suppress enemy forces. These casualties will die without immediate surgical intervention." Another pause, longer this time. "Ghost Rider, what are you requesting?" Dustoff, "I'm requesting that you insert a trauma surgeon and medical team at Phoenix Base to save 6 American soldiers who will die within the hour without immediate surgery." The radio was silent for several minutes while the medical evacuation crew considered her request. Rebecca knew she was asking them to risk their lives flying into an active combat zone, but she also knew that medical personnel understood the stakes as clearly as she did. Ghost Rider 47, Dustoff 6-1. "We're inbound to your location with a full trauma team, ETA 45 minutes. But you better make sure those Apaches clear our landing zone." Rebecca felt a surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her composure. In the space of a few minutes, she had coordinated close air support and medical evacuation for a besieged forward operating base, using skills and knowledge that went far beyond anything expected of a cargo pilot. But the most dangerous part of the night was still ahead. The Apache helicopters would arrive within minutes, followed by the medical evacuation helicopter carrying the trauma team that would save the wounded soldiers. The timing would have to be perfect, and any mistake could result in catastrophic casualties. As Rebecca prepared to coordinate the most complex military operation of her career, she realized that her transformation from cargo pilot to combat leader was complete. The woman who had been dismissed as just a cargo pilot was now orchestrating a multifaceted mission that would determine whether dozens of soldiers lived or died. The next hour would test every skill she had developed over 7 years of military service, and the outcome would either validate her decision to disobey orders or condemn her as a reckless officer who had endangered lives through poor judgment. But as she watched Rodriguez return to the medical bunker to continue fighting for the lives of wounded soldiers, Rebecca knew that she had made the right choice, regardless of the consequences for her own career. The thunderous roar of Apache helicopter rotors cut through the night air as Viper flight arrived over FOB Phoenix. Their thermal imaging systems immediately identifying enemy positions around the besieged base. Rebecca coordinated the attack from the communications bunker, her voice calm and professional despite the chaos erupting outside. "Viper lead, Ghost Rider 47. Priority targets are the massed enemy forces east of the main gate. Friendly positions are marked with infrared strobes. Ghost Rider, Viper lead has visual on multiple enemy concentrations. Beginning gun runs now." The night sky erupted with the distinctive sound of 30mm chain guns as the Apache helicopters engaged enemy positions with devastating precision. Each burst of fire eliminated entire groups of attackers, the psychological effect of the gunship assault causing enemy forces to scatter and seek cover. "Direct hit on enemy mortar position," came Viper lead's report. "Multiple secondary explosions. Enemy forces are withdrawing from the eastern approach." Rebecca monitored the tactical situation while simultaneously coordinating with the incoming medical evacuation helicopter. The timing was critical. The Dustoff crew needed a secure landing zone, but the Apache helicopters couldn't provide close air support indefinitely. Dustoff 6-1, Ghost Rider 47. "What's your estimated time of arrival?" "Ghost Rider, Dustoff 6-1 is 15 minutes out. Be advised we're carrying a full trauma surgical team, including Dr. Sarah Walsh, the region's top combat surgeon." Rebecca felt a surge of relief. Dr. Walsh's reputation was legendary throughout the military medical community. If anyone could save the wounded soldiers, it was her. But first, they had to clear a landing zone in the middle of an active battlefield. Viper. Lead Ghost Rider. We need the area around the helicopter landing pad cleared for medical evacuation in 10 minutes. Copy that, Ghost Rider. Viper flight is engaging all enemy positions within 500 meters of the landing zone. The Apache helicopters swept across the battlefield like avenging angels, their weapon systems eliminating enemy threats with clinical efficiency. Rebecca watched through night vision equipment as the tide of battle shifted decisively in favor of Phoenix Base's defenders. Ghost Rider, this is Major Hayes. Enemy forces are retreating on all fronts. Whatever you did, it's working. Rebecca allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before focusing on the next challenge. The medical evacuation helicopter was approaching, but landing in an active combat zone required split-second timing and perfect coordination. Dustoff 6-1, Ghost Rider 4-7. Landing zone is hot but suppressed. You are cleared for immediate approach. Ghost Rider, Dustoff 6-1 beginning final approach. Have the medical team ready for immediate deployment. The UH-60 medical evacuation helicopter materialized out of the darkness, its pilot demonstrating the same courage that had brought Rebecca to Phoenix Base. The aircraft touched down for barely 30 seconds, just long enough for Dr. Walsh and her surgical team to sprint toward the medical bunker with their equipment. Medical team is on deck, Rebecca reported as the helicopter lifted off immediately. Dustoff 6-1, you are clear for departure. Rebecca ran to the medical bunker where Dr. Walsh was already assessing the wounded soldiers with Rodriguez's assistance. The arrival of professional medical support transformed the chaotic scene into an organized trauma center. Excellent work stabilizing these patients, Dr. Walsh told Rodriguez as she began emergency surgery on the most critical case. Your medical skills saved their lives. For the next 3 hours, Rebecca coordinated the ongoing defense of Phoenix Base while Dr. Walsh and her team performed life-saving surgery on all 6 wounded soldiers. The Apache helicopters maintained overwatch, ensuring that enemy forces couldn't regroup for another assault. As dawn broke over the Syrian desert, the tactical situation had completely reversed. Enemy forces had withdrawn, the wounded soldiers were stable, and reinforcements were finally arriving to relieve the besieged base. Ghost Rider 4-7, this is Colonel Patterson, came a transmission on Rebecca's radio. Rebecca hesitated before responding, knowing that her commanding officer was about to address her insubordination and the consequences that would follow. Colonel Patterson, Ghost Rider 4-7. Captain Thompson, I want a full report on your activities at Phoenix Base. Your decision to disobey direct orders will require a formal investigation. Yes, sir, I understand. But before the conversation could continue, Major Hayes appeared on the radio frequency. Colonel Patterson, this is Major Hayes, commanding officer of FOB Phoenix. I need to provide testimony regarding Captain Thompson's actions. Go ahead, Major. Sir, Captain Thompson and her crew saved this base and the lives of everyone on it. She delivered critical medical supplies under impossible conditions, coordinated close air support that broke an enemy assault, and arranged medical evacuation that saved 6 American soldiers. Without her actions, Phoenix Base would have fallen, and at least 15 soldiers would have died. The radio was quiet for a long moment before Patterson responded. Major Hayes, are you saying that Captain Thompson's violation of direct orders was justified? Colonel, I'm saying that Captain Thompson demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and courage that defines the best of our military. She made decisions that saved American lives, and she should be commended, not court-martialed. 6 months later, Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Thompson stood before a formation of Air Force personnel at the Pentagon as the Secretary of the Air Force pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross to her uniform. The medal recognized her extraordinary heroism during the defense of FOB Phoenix, but more importantly, it represented the complete transformation of her identity within the military. "The citation reads," announced the secretary, "for extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight under extremely hazardous conditions. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's decisive actions, superior airmanship, and unwavering commitment to mission accomplishment resulted in the successful defense of a forward operating base and the preservation of numerous American lives." In the audience, Chun and Rodriguez beamed with pride, both having received their own decorations for valor during the Phoenix mission. Dr. Martinez, fully recovered from his injuries, had personally requested permission to attend the ceremony to honor the aircrew who had saved his patients. But perhaps most significantly, Major Hayes was present to witness Rebecca's recognition. Phoenix Base had not only survived, but had become a model for successful forward operating base defense, largely due to the medical and defensive improvements implemented after Rebecca's mission. "Ma'am," approached a young female cadet after the ceremony, "I'm starting pilot training next month. I want to fly cargo aircraft like you." Rebecca smiled, remembering her own journey from an underestimated cargo pilot to someone who had fundamentally changed how the Air Force viewed the capabilities of transport operations. "What's your name, cadet?" "Jennifer Martinez, ma'am." "My father is Doc Martinez. He told me how you and your crew saved his life and the lives of his patients at Phoenix." Rebecca felt a profound sense of completion. The daughter of one of the soldiers they had saved was now choosing to follow in her footsteps, inspired by actions that had once been dismissed as beyond the scope of cargo operations. "Cadet Martinez, let me tell you the most important thing about being a military pilot," Rebecca said. "It's not about the aircraft you fly or the missions you're assigned. It's about the people you serve with and the lives you can save when it matters most." The young cadet nodded eagerly, and Rebecca could see in her eyes the same determination that had driven her own career from the beginning. As Rebecca walked away from the ceremony, her radio crackled with a new mission assignment. Another forward operating base needed critical supplies delivered to a remote location. She smiled and headed for the flight line, knowing that she was no longer seen as just a cargo pilot. She was Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Thompson, a leader whose actions had proven that courage, skill, and determination could overcome any obstacle when American lives were at stake. The cargo aircraft waiting on the flight line wasn't just a transport. It was a symbol of hope for soldiers around the world who knew that when they needed help, pilots like Rebecca would find a way to deliver it. The mission continued, but now Rebecca carried it forward with the knowledge that her service had transcended every limitation that others had tried to place on her capabilities. She had become exactly what she had always known she could be, not just a pilot, but a warrior whose actions would inspire generations of aviators to come. The story of the cargo pilot who landed a burning C-130 and saved lives had become legend. But for Rebecca, it was simply the beginning of a career dedicated to proving that heroism came not from the aircraft you flew, but from the courage you showed when others needed you most. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.